Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my must-have trade targets for Week 7 of the 2022 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 4 running back prospects, along with 4 wide receiver prospects going into the rest of the season that I believe need to be on your roster. Players that you should be trading for today in order to not only help you for the upcoming schedule, but of course, helping you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. As we progress throughout today's video, the panels to the right of me will fill out with the names and faces of players that I believe you should be targeting. I'll go ahead and supply statistics in order to justify the reasons as to why we're going after these specific prospects in order to ensure success for our fantasy lineups for the rest of the 2022 season. Now, before we get into talking about these specific players, I do want to go ahead and direct you guys back a couple weeks ago when we had a Week 3 running back trade targets video where I presented to you guys 8 running backs that I wanted to mention for you guys to go out and trade for. Now, let's go ahead and let's review these specific players that we talked about in that given episode. As you can see to the right of me, from weeks 3 through 6, we have the results of those given players. And of course, the results doesn't mean that they're going to stop anytime soon, as I believe their momentum is only going to continue regarding their success for the rest of the 2022 season. But we mentioned Javonte Williams, first and foremost. Unfortunately, ACL injury. Obviously, the complete mess that is the Denver Broncos backfield at this current moment in time would have been taken advantage of by Javonte Williams. Unfortunately, we'll have to see him next year. Dalvin Cook, since that video, has been the number 10 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. Pretty good production overall. Austin Eckler, since that video, the number 1 overall running back, as we suggested him. Derrick Henry, unfortunately, did not play in week 6 because of the bye week, but from weeks 3 through 5 has been the number 3 overall running back. But if you want to go ahead and encapsulate him into weeks 3 through 6, he's still been the number 7 overall back, while Josh Jacobs, throughout that span of time, 3 through 5, has been the number 2, and without that, from weeks 3 through 6, has been the number 6 overall running back in fantasy football. We follow that up with J.K. Dobbins, who unfortunately is still dealing with some, repercussions of his injury to his knee from the ACL. Obviously has slowed down, has shown himself a couple of glimpses of having 20-point fantasy upside, but unfortunately been dealing with an injury as of late. We had Alvin Kamara, who of course missed some time, but eventually once he came back from weeks 5 through 6, has been the number 7 overall back in those last 2 weeks. And then we have Ramondre Stevenson, who again was one of those shots in the dark, but has luckily panned out for us, being the number 8 overall back since week 3. Of course, there's a lot of success on the screen, but it doesn't stop here. When we go ahead and we talk about the week after week 3, we had a week 4 wide receiver targets video, and I mentioned these 6 players as guys that you want to go out and trade for. Of course, Justin Jefferson was still dealing with a lot of potential inconsistency early on, but since then has been the number 2 overall wide receiver in half PPR. Deebo Samuel, who we suggested, has been the number 10. Very consistent overall in terms of putting up 10 plus points in 6 consecutive games throughout his season. And of course, having that major performance against the LA Rams most recently. Of course, Mike Evans, despite the fact that he was suspended in week 3, since then has been the number 9 overall wide receiver. We have Keenan Allen, who hasn't even played a game. We suggested, but again, injuries are obviously going to be that variable that we cannot predict. Chris Olave has been fantastic despite the fact that he wasn't present in week 6. And of course, Treylon Burks was that one shot in the dark player that unfortunately went to the injured reserve with a turf toe. Overall, again, when I'm suggesting players, you got to follow, guys. These players are going to have success. So let's go ahead and let's get right into talking about our week 7 must-have trade targets at the running back position. Now, before we get into talking about first and foremost Aaron Jones, I want to remind you guys, if you've made it thus far and you have not yet already, be sure to click the like button down below and of course, subscribe to the channel. We are very close. I mean, literally, I think 100, maybe 200 subscribers away from reaching our goal of 70,000 subscribers. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could help us get there. And of course, we're making daily fantasy football content. So why not go ahead, subscribe, do yourself a favor, and help yourself win a 2022 fantasy football championship this season with the advice that we give daily on the channel. Of course, later tonight, after the Thursday night football game between the New Orleans Saints and the Arizona Cardinals, I will be live streaming here on the channel. For those of you who would like to join us, ask questions in terms of getting some of these trades done in regards to what you're trading away. Any questions you've got regarding week 7, I'll be here to help you guys with that after tonight's Thursday night football game. Also, before we continue, I want to remind you guys, if you want to continue to play fantasy football outside of your own leagues, again, there's many ways to do it. The one that I would suggest is absolutely going ahead and signing up for PrizePicks. Again, if you go ahead, travel to their website, there's a link down in the description. You can go ahead and have daily fantasy at your fingertips for a plethora of sports, whether it is the NBA season which just began. Of course, we have MLB playoffs, and we have the NFL Thursday night game tonight between the Arizona Cardinals and the New Orleans Saints. As of the first half overall statistics that I'm looking at, I found that both Andy Dalton and Kyler Murray, in my opinion, are most likely going to go less in terms of their total first half passing numbers in tonight's contest. So if you are in fact looking to go ahead, potentially get some more action within your weekly games, have more fantasy upside potentially, check out PrizePicks and go ahead and use promo code Andrew today. Again, when you make a first-time deposit using promo code Andrew, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So for those of you who are interested, be sure to take advantage of this opportunity at hand, and of course, potentially put together some entries for this upcoming, Thursday night game and have some fun, whether or not you have players going in the contest. As of right now, of course, we know the Arizona Cardinals, they have been a team that has struggled mightily in the first half of games and, pretty much unable to score. And of course, we all know that Andy Dalton is not a great quarterback, and he's taking on a very good secondary for the Arizona Cardinals, which have stopped a lot of teams. Again, like I mentioned, they haven't given up a receiving touchdown to an opposing wide receiver since week 2. And quite frankly, they haven't been giving up much yardage to opposing wide receivers in quite some time. The best wide receiver that we've seen against them in the last 4 or 5 weeks has been Devonta Smith. Outside of that, really everyone else has been subpar, to say the very least. Either way, I'm taking less on both of their overall potential actions tonight and going ahead and submitting this overall entry. Let's go ahead and click that. All right, with all that covered, again, use promo code Andrew. Let's transition into talking about our running back trade targets, beginning with Aaron Jones. All right, Aaron Jones. Again, I've talked about him for a couple weeks now as a player that you should be holding on to and or potentially investing in, because we know what he's capable of. Just to give you a reminder, okay? In the last 3 seasons, Aaron Jones has finished as the number 2, the number 5, and the number 12 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. Only this last season in 2021 did he finish as the number 12 because he was dealing with a knee injury. And because of that injury, of course, we saw a lot of implementation of A.J. Dillon. But despite all of that, in the last 3 consecutive years, he's been able to put up 1,100 plus total yards, 10 plus touchdowns, and had 47 plus receptions each of those 3 seasons. So if we're going to be in a conversation as to what we're expecting from the potential of Aaron Jones rest of the way, well, I believe the head coach, LaFleur, and Aaron Rodgers have kind of spoken to that. As of late, they both said that they want to run the ball more, and they have to continue to lean upon the running backs of this team to find success and to go ahead and dictate games the way that they want to. And quite frankly, they haven't been doing so as of late. But the way that Aaron Jones has been playing thus far this season, averaging 5.84 yards per carry, I mean, that is his best average in his entire career thus far. If you go ahead and just continue to hand him the ball, David Bakhtiari is going to stay healthy, and on the field, we're going to see ourselves a great opportunity for this Packers offensive line to dominate defenses in the upcoming weeks. I mean, looking at the statistics that I mentioned prior, in terms of what he has put up at a base minimum over the last 3 seasons, 10 touchdowns minimum each of the last 3 seasons. Again, in that 3-year span, put up 40 touchdowns in 45 games. I'm very much so expecting Aaron Jones to score 8 touchdowns in the next 10 games. From weeks 7 through 17, this man should have a touchdown in 8 out of those 10 contests, in my opinion. If you want to go ahead and, root against that idea, trade him away. That's fine by me. But I am 100% leading the hype train. I am the conductor of said train in regards to going on ahead and investing in Aaron Jones rest of the way. I believe this Washington Commanders game is a very easy get-right game for him. Currently, when I've gone ahead and done some extra research and found that he's only facing 8+ defenders in the box on 2.86% of his offensive snaps, that leads me to believe that this team can go ahead and very easily run the ball against defenders and find a lot of success with Aaron Jones. Of course, not even just on the ground, but in the receiving game. This man has been able to get 3+ receptions in 5 out of his 6 games thus far this season. If we're going to continue to get him utilized in the receiving game, of course, his upside continues to go forward. As long as you get those rushing touchdowns, receiving touchdowns in the realm of possibility, we're going to have a lot of success from Aaron Jones in the coming weeks. Moving on, we have DeAndre Swift, the thumbnail for today's video. DeAndre Swift is absolutely the guy. And I understand you may be worried about Jamal Williams, but let's talk about this. In weeks 1 of 2 of the 2022 season, DeAndre Swift had 20 rushing attempts for 200 rushing yards. That's a 10-yard per carry average, 1 rushing touchdown, 8 targets that led to 5 catches, 62 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. That's 40.7 fantasy points. That's over 20 fantasy points per week and a half PPR in the 2 games that he has played. Now, just to give you some perspective, even in that second game, he was not healthy. He was dealing with an ankle injury and was limited in terms of snap counts. So if you go ahead and you get him back at a full capacity after, pretty much being out for the last 3 weeks, we're going to be able to see DeAndre Swift come back and be an incredible option for us. And I understand for those of you who are worried about Jamal Williams and his potential rest of season, I'm not ignoring that fact. He is certainly going to be a red zone fiend, potentially vulture, that is going to take away some value. But ultimately, with DeAndre Swift's overall upside and his efficiency as a runner and the ability for this offensive line to make holes, he is going to be an extremely valuable prospect that, looking at his upcoming schedule, quite frankly, it does seem like they're going to be running the ball a bunch and finding a lot of success against these defenses. So I am 100% on board investing in the idea of picking up DeAndre Swift in the coming weeks as someone that could very easily be the guy. Like, if I have Dalvin Cook, I'm trading him immediately for DeAndre Swift. I'm doing that without a question in my mind because I know, yes, they're both probably going to see very similar opportunities, but one will have more receiving upside and is also the younger prospect that has more burst and has far more potential behind his respective offensive line. Overall, I think he's a home run hitter. And when we're kind of involving ourselves with a player like that, obviously coming off an injury, there is risk. There is potential volatility. But with that all being mentioned, I'm full in on DeAndre Swift. I was in the offseason. I'm not stopping anytime soon. Moving on to the next running back I wanted to mention. Perhaps you didn't anticipate for me to bring up Ezekiel Elliott. And a lot of people were clowning me last time when we had our week 3 conversation and I brought up Josh Jacobs as a trade target. And, I'm going to do it again here where I'm just going to go away from the public and I'm going to tell you to trade for Ezekiel Elliott. Because with all the research I've done, I am 100% confident that this team is going to continue to hand this man the ball. And with Dak Prescott coming back, that only helps the offense. And as the offense continues to grow, not only as a rushing attack, but as a team that can utilize play action and continue to dump off passes in the direction of Ezekiel Elliott, his value is only going to continue to climb as we progress through the rest of the season. Now, in terms of their upcoming schedule, they've got themselves a lot of easy games. Of course, this week against the Detroit Lions front 7, that should be an easy one. But let's go ahead and give you a couple statistics that give me the confidence to trading for him. Thus far this season, from weeks 2 through 6, with Cooper Rush at quarterback, Ezekiel Elliott has handled 63% of the offensive snaps in this backfield, along with 63% of the running back rushing attempts. Thus far, he has 99 rushing attempts, and as an average across the board, he's averaging nearly 17 rushing attempts per game, 66.8 rushing yards per game, 4.14 yard per carry average, 0.4 rushing touchdowns per game, 1.2 targets, 1 reception, 7 receiving yards, and 10.28 fantasy points per game. And you may be wondering, Andrew, those aren't great statistics. Are we sure you want to go ahead and trade for Ezekiel Elliott? And with all the doubt in your mind, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, I absolutely want to trade for Ezekiel Elliott because I know what he's capable of. In the last 4 consecutive years, if we talk about from 2018 through 2021, Zeke produced a minimum of 47 receptions every single year. And now that we're going to get Dak Prescott back, you cannot tell me that the relationship that those two have, the fact that Dak Prescott is best friends with Ezekiel Elliott, isn't going to play an impact. I mean, think about it. We look at some other quarterback, wide receiver combinations that are best friends, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown. And of course, they find a lot of success because they want to continue to trust upon that singular player to get the job done. And I absolutely believe that Ezekiel Elliott is going to be asked to do so once again for the rest of this season. And once those receiving totals begin to creep upward and those rushing numbers continue to stay at their current point, the rushing touchdowns are only going to help as this offense is going to be far more efficient. Thus far this season, the Dallas Cowboys' red zone rushing presence has pretty much been nothing. They have had 2 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line thus far this season. 2 rushing attempts, one to Zeke for a touchdown and the other for Pollard for a touchdown. Now, if you go back to last year, 2021, Zeke had 12 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line for 6 rushing touchdowns. The way that this offensive line has looked, the fact that they're eventually going to get Tyron Smith back, I think they're in a fantastic position to succeed, and I am 100% back in on Ezekiel Elliott. You guys saw me from weeks 1 through 6 rake him relatively low because without Dak and in tough matchups, you really couldn't trust him, and that's where we were at. But going forward, the numbers are going to continue to creep up for him, and his dependability is certainly going to be there. Let's move on to Travis Etienne, the final running back that I wanted to mention on today's video. In the last 2 weeks, Travis Etienne has had 20 rushing attempts, 157 rushing yards, 7 targets, 5 catches, 65 receiving yards, and 24.7 fantasy points. The only difference between that performance over the course of the last 2 weeks and the numbers that I mentioned in regards to DeAndre Swift just moments ago is just touchdowns. That's it. Literally 6-point influxes. And quite frankly, what we've seen recently kind of gives me more confidence in Travis Etienne taking over this backfield. Just this last Sunday against the Indianapolis Colts, they get down to the red zone, 1st and goal from the 1-yard line. And what exactly do? They give Travis Etienne the first crack at it. Wildcat runs the ball, but unfortunately goes down for a negative 1-yard loss. But they gave him the first crack at the 1st and goal carry. And in my opinion, that goes ahead, demonstrates confidence in the idea that Doug Peterson believes this is going to be the back of the future. Someone who's averaging 5.6 yards per carry thus far this season. I believe that James Robinson eventually is going to fall off. I mean, there's a reason why in the last 3 consecutive games, weeks 4, 5, and 6, Travis Etienne has outsnapped James Robinson in every single one of those games. We are beginning to lean in the direction where we're going to need receiving upside out of this Jacksonville Jaguars offense, as they're not going to be dominating early games, especially against the games that they're playing upcoming. Some of these matchups are going to be difficult, and when they're put to the test and they have to come back in the second half, who's going to be on the field? That's absolutely going to be Travis Etienne, who's averaging nearly 10 yards per catch thus far this season. When you're in that realm of possibility, of course, they got to get him more targets and got to get him more utilization. He looks very similar to the overall productive numbers as of the last 2 weeks that we've seen from DeAndre Swift in weeks 1 through 2. And like I was mentioning this offseason, Travis Etienne is the budget version of DeAndre Swift. He's DeAndre Swift from 2021. And I think we're fully in on that idea going forward. Let's move on to the wide receiver conversation, beginning with T. Higgins. Listen, T. Higgins is a guy that yesterday in my wide receiver rankings video, I said you got to go out and you have to trade for him because there is so much value to be had within this Bengals offense. And T. Higgins, once he's healthy, is going to be unstoppable. In the last 17 games, just taking this into perspective, when we even include the 2021 year, the, of course, playoffs from last season, the 4 games that they played, and the beginning of this season, 2022, in the 17 healthy games that he has played, so he is not left with an injury or that one game where he was completely injured by the end of the first quarter, we have seen 12 out of the last 17 games for T. Higgins consist of 70 or more receiving yards. There's a reason why on yesterday's episode, I talked about taking the more via PrizePicks in terms of 65.5 receiving yards, because he's been able to accomplish that in 12 out of the last 17 games he has played within this offense. And in those 17 games, he's been averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. So with all that taken into account, and then we go ahead and isolate the 2022 numbers, the 4 games thus far this season that he has played fully healthy, he's been averaging 8.75 targets per game, 6 catches per game, 84 receiving yards per game, and a half a touchdown per game. And that leads to 14.38 fantasy points per game. Absolutely top 12 wide receiver upside for the rest of the year. And there's a reason why I have him as a top 12 ranked wide receiver going into this week against the Atlanta Falcons. He is someone you need to invest in. And yes, he's coming off of 2 pretty disappointing performances. And if you can go ahead and convince a fantasy manager to bring him into our direction and bolster our lineup, by all means, you should be going out and making that investment in T. Higgins. Moving on, let's talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, another Detroit Lion that I want to mention. As of right now, the receiving core for the Detroit Lions is kind of in flux. DJ Chark's still injured. Josh Reynolds dealing with an injury. And Jamison Williams still on the injured reserve. If Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be the only receiving option going forward, we've seen him be a pretty consistent option when he has been called upon. And his number's been called to make big plays and carry this team. I've talked about this on multiple occasions. From weeks 13 of the 2021 season to weeks 2 of the 2022 season, that 8 consecutive games of 10 plus targets, 8 plus receptions, 64 plus receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns in 8 games was not a fluke. The fact that he was putting up as many fantasy points as he was and continued to do so thus far this season from weeks 1 through 3 as he was averaging 20.53 fantasy points per game, it is something that we need to pay attention to. He is absolutely the breakout of the year. He is what we wanted, players like, Elijah Moore to become. He is what we wanted Jerry Jeudy to become. But quite frankly, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a 4th round pick, is dominating and continuing to find himself a lot of potential upside in the National Football League. And as of this moment in time, he is a prospect in my eyes that, yes, has been underwhelming as of late, but I'm still willing to pay a pretty penny to get his services on my team for the rest of the 2022 year. Moving on to Chris Godwin, another slot receiver that we wanted to mention. Chris Godwin is slowly but surely getting back to his 2021 self. In the last 3 consecutive weeks, we have seen a total of 28 total targets that have led to 19 catches, 215 receiving yards, and 31.2 fantasy points. Unfortunately, was tackled down at the 1-yard line just a couple weeks ago against the Atlanta Falcons, and very could have easily had himself a touchdown, but when we look at the fact that he's been averaging 9.33 targets per game in the last 3 weeks, those are the numbers that I want to see. Averaging 71.7 receiving yards per game, Chris Godwin is in a perfect scenario to succeed, especially considering Tom Brady is in desperate need of getting the ball out of his hands, considering his offensive line is not doing their job. So why not go ahead and dump it off to your favorite slot receiver, Chris Godwin? Now, when I said moments ago that he's getting back to his 2021 self, what I'm exactly referring to is weeks 13 and 14 of the 2021 year. If you guys remember, in those 2 games prior to the ACL injury in week 15, we saw 2 games back-to-back where Chris Godwin was the entire offense. 17 targets, 15 catches, 143 receiving yards. The following week, 15 targets, 10 catches, 105 receiving yards. These are the numbers that I'm expecting to eventually climb up to. And when we get there, and when Chris Godwin feels fully comfortable within this offense, my goodness, is he going to take over. Now, in a half PPR, yes, he's a little bit less valued, but in a full PPR scoring format, he is absolutely got potential top 15, potentially top 12 upside. There's a reason why he's my number 12 ranked wide receiver going into this week. Obviously, a great matchup, and of course, they're going to be dumping the ball off a lot. In my opinion, Chris Godwin is a guy that we have to go after, especially considering the last 3 weeks, he hasn't had an explosive performance yet. I'm suggesting you go out there and you invest in Chris Godwin before he has those blow-up games, and his price tag becomes a little too expensive for our blood. Let's move on to the final player that I wanted to mention. He is playing tonight, in fact. It is DeAndre Hopkins. If, in fact, you are watching this video and you have an opportunity to go ahead and trade for DeAndre Hopkins, I think tonight certainly becomes a night where everything shifts for this offense. There is a very good potential that Kyler Murray wakes up from the slumber that he has been in, or the fact that Call of Duty comes out next week may completely dethrone everything that I'm talking about. Very easily, we could see Kyler Murray, just fall off the proverbial cliff in terms of fantasy point production in the next couple weeks because of the Call of Duty release. But all memes aside, as of the last 24 games that we've seen Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins play together, DeAndre Hopkins has averaged 14.25 half PPR fantasy points per game. Of course, from weeks 2 through 5 of this season thus far, Marquise Hollywood-Brown was averaging 11.6 targets per game, which was eventually leading to 15.14 fantasy points per game. From 2020 through 2021, when DeAndre Hopkins was targeted 10 or more times in a game, he's averaged 18.63 fantasy points per game. There is so much potential for the number 1 wide receiver of this team to have incredible upside, especially tonight where there's no Marshawn Lattimore. I'm expecting a huge breakout performance from DeAndre Hopkins to reestablish himself as the guy, as a top 10 wide receiver in the National Football League, as a potential future Hall of Famer. I believe there's a lot of gas left in the tank. And quite frankly, I may be just, hyping myself up because I don't want to see another Julio Jones take, place here. But I truly do believe that DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a guy that you want to invest in. Of course, we're going to see Marquise Hollywood-Brown out for the next month. And once, in fact, he does come back, DeAndre Hopkins still maintains his number 1 role in this offense. The only thing this does purely is see DeAndre Hopkins, who is an older wide receiver, have 6 weeks of just preparing his body. He's going to be able to stay healthy and dominate the next 4 weeks and establish himself as a wide receiver 1. All right, that's going to cover it for today's video. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you have not yet already, of course, click the subscribe button down below, click the like button, and let me know what other prospects you are trading for in the coming weeks prior to their breakout performances, or guys that you might want to go ahead and invest in. Players potentially like Jonathan Taylor, even though we know their price tag is really high, are we still willing to go out there and make a play? Obviously, I'd be 100% willing to do so, and I'm sure you should be, doing the same. But either way, let me know down in the comment section. Greatly appreciate it. Later tonight, after the Thursday night football game between the Saints and the Cardinals, after DeAndre Hopkins has himself a big game, I'll be here streaming on the channel. So if you'd like to join us, ask questions, be able to do that and help you guys out for your upcoming matchups and your trades that you're going to be making this upcoming weekend. Also, be sure to check out PrizePicks like I talked about a little bit earlier on today's episode. We are going ahead and we're going with the entry of both Andy Dalton and Kyler Murray going less on both of their first half passing yards. Be sure to check that out today and use promo code Andrew when you click on that link down in the description. When you make a first-time deposit, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So if you deposit 20, you'll be given 20. You deposit 50, you'll be given 50. It's a first-time deposit match, identical, up to $100. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.